Now, it's a well-known fact that if there's anyone I respect more than Twitch's Trust and Safety Council, it's today's mainstream entertainment journalists, and nobody epitomizes this profession more than Scott Mendelsohn, a man well known for his hard but fair and insightful articles on the movie industry and general air of authority and integrity. Scott's not the kind of guy to shill for big movie studios, write puff pieces to explain away the failure of objectively bad movies, or criticize fandoms and audiences for being unhappy at the wholesale destruction of their childhood heroes.
Yes, I can definitely smell shite.
Which brings me neatly along to the topic of today's video. See, Scott wrote an article for Forbes recently dealing with the backlash against Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. And rather than dismissing such criticism as the unfounded temper tantrums of basement-dwelling man-babies clinging pathetically to their fading memories, Scott does the unthinkable and acknowledges that maybe they have a point.
No way!
I mean, he doesn't go totally off the map and suggest that The Last Jedi might have been a bad movie or anything, but even this tiny admission is pretty telling. It's always funny watching a man trying to reconcile two completely contradictory bits of information without incurring the wrath of his corporate overlords. But as much as I enjoy the car crash of political ideology running headfirst into the brick wall of reality, the point here is that this article actually brings up the interesting question of why certain characters are popular and others aren't. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's boring as fuck, and about 90% of it is Scott desperately trying not to offend Rian Johnson and Disney, but the premise can best be summed up in the following paragraph. If you listen to Hollywood in terms of how to craft new heroes and revamp existing ones, audiences don't like the straight arrow Boy Scout. They prefer Han Solo to Luke Skywalker, Jack Sparrow to Will Turner, and Batman to Superman. Luke Skywalker and Superman are often used as templates for the kind of Dudley Do-Right hero that filmmakers claim to avoid, because audiences allegedly can't relate to them. But recent history shows the fallacy of that argument. So basically, Hollywood thinks the traditional wholesome hero isn't popular anymore, but they keep making lots of money at the box office, so maybe they haven't gone out of fashion after all. The thing that Scott struggles to explain is the popularity of less conventional heroes like Tony Stark, Han Solo, Jack Sparrow, Bruce Wayne, and Walter White. How strange. It's almost as if there's something else that ties all these characters together. Something more fundamental than the archetype that Scott clumsily tries to pigeonhole them into. He's correctly identified the problem, and he comes so close to something that could be considered a valid conclusion, but his instinct to shill for Disney at all costs prevents him from taking that final step into actual understanding. Truly, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Unless you force a fucking hosepipe down his throat. Well, worry ye not, because the drinker's here with hosepipe in hand to condense this nonsense.
I feel safer already.
Jerk off.
The thing that all of these different characters have in common is that they're all extremely well written. Their actions and decisions are logically consistent with their personalities. They're interesting and nuanced, played by competent actors that are well suited to the role and understand the character they're playing. Equally important, they're treated with respect by their writers. Tony Stark, for example, is a brilliant but flawed man whose ability to invent new technology and think fast to get himself out of difficult situations is matched by his ego and arrogance, his reluctance to cooperate with others, and his belief that he can fix anything if he applies his mind to it. Even in the most dire of situations, he always has some witty comeback or snarky put down to keep his enemies off balance.
Have you been juicing? A little vibranium cocktail?
Not a great plan.
Yeah, he makes mistakes and often pays a high price for them, but the script never mocks him, belittles him, disrespects him, or has him act completely out of character just to fit the requirements of the story. Steve Rogers starts out as a scrawny little kid whose lack of size and strength have held him back his whole life, but instead of becoming bitter and envious, he's developed into a scrappy and determined little fighter. Again, the script treats his character with respect, helping you to empathise with his struggle without mocking or pitying him. And when he gets the chance to become something more, it really feels like he deserves it. It's also worth noting that the character didn't really take off until Winter Soldier introduced new depth and complexity to his outlook, forcing him to question the cause he was fighting for. In this case, Steve's old-fashioned belief in fairness and personal liberty puts him in opposition to an increasingly sinister and authoritarian SHIELD. At the other end of the character scale, Walter White is one of the greatest examples of character development in modern entertainment. He starts out as a mild-mannered and decent man that's been let down and taken advantage of his whole life. When he's given a terminal diagnosis, he's reluctantly drawn into a world of crime and murder, forced to resort to increasingly ruthless and morally reprehensible acts to protect his hard-won gains. Unfortunately, his newfound power and respect starts to go to his head, ultimately warping him into something completely unrecognisable from the man he once was. I could go on and on about this, but the point is that each of these characters became popular not because of what they were, but how they were written and portrayed. They were each well developed, well written and well acted, and audience responded to those things. Most fundamental of all, their writers respected them, which is the first and most vital step towards making the audience respect them. Because believe it or not, audiences aren't as dumb as modern Hollywood might think. Yeah, they can't always articulate why they like a certain character, or how smart writing can convey a lot of information in a short time, or make complex character development seem easy, or how a good script can depict a flawed person that makes mistakes while still maintaining respect for them. But they know it when they see it, and more important, they know when it's missing. Which brings me back around to Luke Skywalker, the subject of this article. See, describing Luke from the original trilogy as a glorified Boy Scout is ridiculously reductive and patronising towards both the character and the reader, which is pretty much what you'd expect from modern clickbait journalism, so whatever. The reality is that Luke is a classic example of the reluctant hero who gets swept off on a journey, a hero's journey if you will.
No way!
When he starts out, he's young and idealistic and inexperienced, just a farm boy living a sheltered life at the ass end of nowhere, who harbours romantic notions of adventure and excitement. His first steps out into the wider world are tentative and faltering. He makes mistakes, lacks the knowledge needed to navigate a dangerous world, and gets himself into situations he can't handle. And it takes the guidance of an older and wiser mentor to get him started on the right path. The first time he gets into a fight, or operates a gun turret, or holds a lightsaber, or flies an X-Wing, he's kind of clumsy and awkward, and he has to learn fast to stay alive, growing in skill and confidence along the way. His actions throughout the movie are entirely consistent with what we know about his personality and backgrounds. By the second film, he's started to expand his powers, but his impetuous nature and emotional attachment to his friends causes him to rush into a fight he isn't ready for, and he pays a heavy price for his mistake. But by the final film, he's learned to temper his power with wisdom, compassion, and restraint. In short, he's completed the hero's journey. And at every stage of that journey, the script manages to stay respectful to his character. It never has him do stupid shit for a quick laugh, or makes him weak and incapable just to elevate another character, or has him make choices that are totally inconsistent with everything he's done before, just to fit the demands of the story. People bonded with Luke because fundamentally, he was a well-written character played by a good actor who went on an interesting and exciting journey, ultimately becoming a stronger and wiser man as a result. A character whose writer very much respected and cared for him. So as you can imagine, it was a bit of a kick in the nuts to see him living as a broken, defeated, bitter, cynical loser in The Last Jedi. A man whose entire personality and worldview has been altered to fit the needs of the story, massage the ego of the director, and advance the political ideology of the producer. It was pretty clear that the bond of respect between writer and character no longer existed, unless that character happened to have a vagina, of course. And if the writer doesn't respect the character he's working with, then why should the audience? Luke's mistakes in The Last Jedi were no longer portrayed as understandable and natural flaws in an otherwise good man. Instead, they came across as a cynical and mean-spirited attempt to denigrate, humiliate, and minimize a once popular character in order to elevate his inferior replacement.
Not a great plan.
In other words, people could tell that Disney didn't respect Luke Skywalker, and they didn't like it. If you want another example, you need look no further than Jean-Luc Picard, who was once a smart, cultured, and highly capable commander that audiences respected and liked. Then they morphed him into a pathetic, clueless, submissive old man who spends his days getting yelled at and apologising to everyone.
Shut the fuck up.
He was no longer consistent with who he was before, and this new personality came across as a very obvious and contrived attempt to manipulate the audience. The point I'm making here is that the popularity of a protagonist has got nothing to do with the mold you try to fit them into. There is not and never has been some magical archetype that's guaranteed to make your character popular. The hero of your story can be selfish or altruistic, smart or stupid, cynical or idealistic, a lone wolf or a team player, a defender of the law or a breaker of it, an average Joe or a superhuman. They can be any of these things or none of them, because none of that really matters. What matters is that whatever they are, they're well written, interesting and complex. They go on a satisfying emotional journey. They stay true to themselves, and the bond of respect between character and writer remains solid. Do these things and your character stands a good chance of being well received. Do it not, and the drinker will be paying you a little visit. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.